This is the story of Noah Blake and his mother, Catherine Ann Mercer. Noah Blake grew up in a house where love was given freely, but questions were not. His adoptive parents were kind people, the sort who framed photographs and remembered birthdays and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. And yet, there was always something sitting at the edge of Noah's childhood, like a word he couldn't quite pronounce. He carried it the way some people carry old injuries. Not with pain exactly, but with an awareness, a slight favoring of one side. The thing he carried was a small brass key, numbered 4471, left with him in a hospital bassinet when he was 5 days old, tucked inside a folded cloth so deliberately placed that it could not have been accidental. He grew up knowing two things about his biological mother: that she had left, and that she had left that key. The question of why one and why the other would take him 31 years to answer. Noah Blake was 7 years old the first time he held the key long enough to really look at it. His mother, his adoptive mother, Margaret, a soft-spoken elementary school librarian who smelled of lavender and old paper, had kept it in a small cedar box on the top shelf of his closet. She hadn't hidden it exactly. She had simply placed it somewhere a small child's hands couldn't reach, and when he was old enough to ask about it, she had sat with him on the edge of his bed and told him the truth as she understood it. "Someone left it with you," she said. "We don't know what it opens, but whoever left it wanted you to have it someday." Noah turned it over in his palm. It was heavier than he expected. The brass had a warmth to it, almost like it had been held recently, though he knew that was impossible. The number 4471 was stamped into one flat side with a precision that suggested institution, a bank perhaps, or a post office. There was no brand, no distinguishing mark beyond the number. "Do you think she's still out there?" he asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone avoiding a question, more the quiet of someone choosing words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "I think," she said finally, "that people who leave things behind usually have reasons. Whether those reasons are good ones is something we can't always know from the outside." It was a careful answer. Noah recognized even then that it was careful, but he accepted it the way children accept things that are offered with love. And he put the key back in its cedar box, and he didn't take it out again for 11 years. He grew up in a medium-sized town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everybody knew your family's approximate income and nobody said so directly. His father's adoptive father, Thomas Blake, a civil engineer who coached Little League and fixed things on weekends, was a steady, uncomplicated man in the best sense. Thomas didn't talk about feelings the way some fathers didn't talk about feelings. Not from coldness, but from a generation's worth of conditioning that said feelings were private weather. But he showed up. He was at every school play, every baseball game, every parent-teacher conference. He was the kind of father who taught Noah to change a tire and shake a hand firmly and say thank you to waitstaff. And if he never quite said, "I love you" in those exact words very often, Noah felt it anyway, the way you feel warmth from something that doesn't need to announce itself. Noah was not unhappy. This is important to say plainly because unhappiness would make the story simpler, and the story was not simple. He was a quiet child who became a thoughtful teenager, who became a careful adult. He had friends, not many, but real ones. He studied architecture at Penn State, graduated midway through his class, and took a job with a small firm in Pittsburgh that specialized in residential renovations. He was good at it, the careful reading of existing structures, the understanding of what a building was trying to be before someone changed it. His colleagues said he had an instinct for it. What they meant, though they didn't know it, was that he had spent a lifetime reading spaces where something was missing and learning to work around the absence. He dated a few relationships that lasted a year or two before something quietly dissolved. He wasn't difficult to be with. His partner said this, usually near the end. He was just slightly elsewhere, present but not fully landed. Like a man who has learned to be comfortable in waiting rooms. He was 18 when he took the key out of the cedar box again. He'd come home from his first semester at university for winter break, and Margaret had been in the hospital for a week with pneumonia, not dangerous, ultimately, but frightening in the specific way a parent's illness is frightening. the sudden reminder that they are not permanent fixtures. He'd sat in her hospital room watching her sleep and felt something shift in him, some tectonic thing he couldn't name. When she came home, he helped her to the couch and made tea badly and sat across from her in the armchair that had always been Thomas's chair, and he said, "Mom, the key. Is there anything else you know about it? Anything you didn't tell me?" Margaret looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who had been waiting without urgency for a specific conversation. "There was a note," she said. "Not with the key, with you, in the bassinet." Noah waited. It said, "He'll know when. Don't let him look before he's ready." She paused. "We didn't know what ready meant. We still don't. But you're asking now, so." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She was wearing the pale blue one. He would remember this detail for the rest of his life, and produced a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded many times over many years. He took it without speaking. The handwriting was careful and slightly slanted, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had learned penmanship properly, and then slowly let it go informal. It said, "Safety Deposit Box. First National Trust." The number on the key. He should go alone. "I'm sorry I can't explain this in person. I hope that someday the explanation will be enough." There was no name, no signature. Just that, and below it, in smaller letters, almost an afterthought, "Tell him I thought about him. Every single day." Noah sat with the note for a long time. The television was off. Outside, the Pennsylvania winter was doing its gray, indifferent thing. Margaret watched him the way she had always watched him. Quietly, without pressure, with a patience that was itself a form of love. "Why didn't you show me this sooner?" he asked. Not accusingly, genuinely. "Because," she said, "you never asked quite like this before." He put the note in his jacket pocket. He put the key in there too. And then he sat there for another hour, not saying much, drinking his bad tea, while the winter pressed its face against the window and he tried to feel the shape of the thing that was coming toward him. He didn't go to the bank that winter, or the next, or the one after. He went at 31. The years between 18 and 31 were not wasted ones, though Noah would later look back at them with the particular tenderness reserved for time you didn't fully inhabit. He built a life in Pittsburgh that looked, from a reasonable distance, like a good life. His firm grew, not dramatically, but steadily, and he was made a junior partner at 28, which surprised him and shouldn't have. He was good at his work in a way that had nothing to do with brilliance, and everything to do with attention. He listened to what clients said and, more usefully, to what they didn't say. He understood that when someone said, "I want this room to feel bigger," they usually meant, "I want my life to feel less crowded," and he tried, where he could, to give them that. He lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment near the river. The second bedroom he used as a drafting room, though he'd switched largely to digital work years ago, and the drafting table mostly held books and coffee cups in the cedar box, which he'd brought with him when he moved out and placed on a shelf where he could see it from his desk. He kept the key on a simple ring with his house key, not as a statement, just because it seemed right to keep it close. His closest friend was a woman named Delia Marsh. They'd met in an elective philosophy course in their 3rd year of university and had sustained an easy, honest friendship through a decade of cities and job changes and the ordinary casualties of adult life. Delia was a social worker, sharp and unsentimental in a way that made her good at her job and occasionally difficult at dinner parties. She knew about the key. She knew about the note. She had, on several occasions over several years, suggested that Noah might want to actually go to the bank. "I know," he always said. "That's not what I asked," she'd say. "I know that too." She understood, after the 3rd or 4th such exchange, that the key and the box and the note had become something Noah was organizing his life around, the way you organize a room around a piece of furniture. You're not quite ready to move, carefully, with awareness, with a slight deliberateness in keeping other things from encroaching on its space. "You're afraid it'll explain too much," she said once over wine in her apartment on a Sunday evening. Or not enough. Maybe both, Noah said. Both is usually the answer, she said. Then she looked at him with an expression he had learned to read over years of friendship, not pity, which he wouldn't have tolerated, but something closer to careful recognition, the look of someone who sees a thing clearly and knows better than to say so too directly. You know what I think is interesting? You're going to tell me. You're an architect. You literally make your living understanding what structures are built to hold, and you won't go look at this one thing that someone built specifically for you to find. He didn't have an answer for that. He poured more wine. Outside, Pittsburgh was doing what Pittsburgh does in October, turning copper and amber, the hills going warm before the cold. I don't know, he said. Maybe like, he paused, and something strange moved across his face. A flicker of self-consciousness, so acute it was almost physical. He glanced up, not quite at Delia, but somewhere past her, or through her, toward something she couldn't locate. Maybe like, I don't know why I said it that way. He looked slightly embarrassed. Maybe like this story. He stopped. He shook his head. Delia stared at him. What? Nothing. Sorry. That was, I don't know where that came from. Are you having a stroke? No. He laughed, and it sounded genuine, and whatever the moment was, it passed. I just meant, I think I'm afraid of what it closes, not what it opens. Delia let the strangeness go. She set her glass down. Say that again. Once I open the box, I know. And once I know, whatever story I've been carrying, the one where she had a reason, the one where it wasn't cruelty, that story is either confirmed or it's gone. And I've been living inside it for a long time. Delia was quiet for a moment. What if it's a third thing? What if the truth is something you didn't construct? Then I have to start over, he said. At 31. People start over at 60, she said. At 31, it's practically early. He went the following spring. There was no dramatic catalyst. He woke on a Tuesday in April, a morning that was ordinary in every observable respect. Gray sky, coffee, the sound of traffic on the street below. And he knew the way you sometimes know things before you've reasoned your way to them, that it was time. He called the bank first. First National Trust was still operating. And yes, they still maintained long-term safety deposit boxes. And yes, box 4471 was on record. He was startled by this, somehow, despite the logic of it. And yes, a record existed of the box holder. And yes, he would need to bring identification and the key. And no, they couldn't tell him anything further over the phone. He brought Delia. He'd meant to go alone, the note had said alone, but when he called her that morning, she heard something in his voice and simply said, I'll drive. She waited in the lobby, reading something on her phone, while a young bank manager, earnest, slightly formal, led Noah through a door and down a short corridor to a room lined with small metal doors. Box 4471 was at eye level, which struck him as oddly considerate, as though someone had known he'd be standing here and wanted him comfortable. His hand, putting the key in, was steady. He noticed this and filed it away. The box was not large. Inside it were letters, 7 of them, in envelopes, numbered in the same slanted handwriting as the note he'd been carrying since he was 18. Beneath the letters, there was a small photograph, face down. He picked up the letters. He left the photograph where it was. He sat down in the wooden chair the bank had provided, in that small fluorescent room, and he began to read. The first 3 letters were not what he expected. He had braced for apology. He had prepared, somewhere in the architecture of himself, for the particular weight of being told I'm sorry in various configurations across multiple pages. What he found instead was something stranger and more intimate. He found a person. The first letter was dated 5 days after his birth. The handwriting in it was different from the note, looser, less controlled. The letters slightly uneven in a way that suggested either exhaustion or distress or both. I don't know how to begin this. I've started 4 times and thrown it away. So I'll just say the fact of it. You are 5 days old and I am leaving you. And it is the hardest thing I have ever done and also the only thing I can do. I know that sounds like something people say. I know how it sounds from the outside. I'm asking you to believe me anyway. And I know that's asking a lot from someone who can't yet read. He read it twice. Then he set it down carefully on top of the box and picked up the second envelope. The second letter was dated 6 months later. In it, she described where she was living. She didn't name the city, only said it was somewhere with a good transit system and cheap coffee and rain, which narrowed it only slightly. She described her apartment, a single room above a laundromat, and the noise the machines made at night, which she had come to find almost comforting. She described what she did for work, which she called clerical, mostly, which is the honest way of saying I type things for people who have decided I don't need to know what the things mean. She didn't explain why she had left him. Not yet. She did say, I think about your hands. The nurses let me hold you for an hour, the first day, before things got complicated. You had very small hands, as babies do, which sounds like an obvious thing to say. But I mean it in a specific way. You held my finger like you were deciding whether to trust it. I've thought about that a lot, the way you hadn't yet learned not to. Noah set that one down too. He was aware of his own breathing in the small room. He was aware of the fluorescent light and the faint mechanical hum of the building and the fact that his hands were still, which surprised him again. The third letter was dated 2 years after his birth. It was the first one in which she mentioned fear, not directly, but in the way careful people mention things that terrify them, which is to talk around the edges of the shape until the shape becomes visible. I moved again. I'm getting good at it. There's a version of this that looks like freedom, and some days I almost believe that version. There are people I cannot name in this letter because the letter might be read by someone who is not you, and if it is, I've already said too much. What I can say is that leaving you was not abandonment in the ordinary sense. It was, in the most specific sense I can articulate, the opposite. I put you down in the safest place I knew, so that the thing following me would not know where to look. He read that paragraph 3 times, the thing following me. He looked up at the wall of metal doors. He looked at the remaining 4 envelopes in the box. He looked at the photograph still lying face down, which he had not touched. He thought about what Delia had said. What if the truth is something you didn't construct? He had constructed over 31 years a story in which his biological mother had made a terrible choice that was also on some level understandable. The choice of a young woman without resources, without support, without a road forward that included a child. He had been careful not to cast her as a villain in this story. He had been careful not to cast her as a martyr either. He had landed somewhere in the middle, on something like she did what she had to do, which was compassionate and probably also self-protective. He had not constructed a story that included the thing following me. He pulled the 4th envelope from the box. His hands were still steady. The 4th letter was the longest. It was dated when he would have been 7, the year Margaret had first let him hold the key. It began, if you're reading this at the right time, you're somewhere between 18 and 35. I hope you're not reading it at 40, because that means I miscalculated you. And I'd like to think I know, even from this distance, what kind of person you'll be. He stopped. Read that sentence again. Even from this distance, she had been watching. Not in any surveillance sense. What she described as the letter unfolded was more like watching from a very great remove, the way you watch a weather system move across a landscape you can see but not touch. She had hired, at significant personal cost, a private researcher. She used that word, researcher, carefully and deliberately, to send her updates, twice a year, on his general well-being. Not photographs, not details that could be traced. Only he is well. He is in school. He appears to be loved. I paid for those 12 words every 6 months for 15 years, she wrote. It was the most important money I ever spent. I need you to know that. I need you to know that I was not moving through my life as though you weren't in it. You were always in it. You were just in a part of it I couldn't get to. Noah pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, not crying, not yet. Something more contained than that. The specific pressure of a person trying to stay organized in the face of information that is reorganizing them. He thought, I'm 31 years old, and my mother has been watching me from somewhere I can't name, and she put a key in a bassinet and a note in my blanket, and she said, "Tell him I thought about him every single day." He thought. Margaret knew. Margaret knew she was watching and didn't say. He filed that thought away for later. He picked up the fifth envelope. He read the fifth and sixth letters in the bank. He read the seventh one outside, sitting on a bench on the sidewalk in the pale April sunlight, because by the time he reached it, he needed air. Delia sat next to him on the bench without asking what had happened. She had looked at his face when he came back through the lobby and understood that questions could wait. He read. She waited. She waited. The fifth letter was the one that explained the shape of things. Her name was Catherine Ann Mercer. She put it in the letter plainly at the beginning, as though she had been waiting a long time to introduce herself properly. She had been, at 23, the administrative assistant to a man named Gerald Frost, who ran a financial consulting firm in Philadelphia that was, beneath its legitimate exterior, involved in the movement of money for people who required that money to be invisible. She hadn't known this when she took the job. She had discovered it gradually, the way you discover a structural problem in a building, not all at once, but in a series of small wrongnesses that accumulate into an undeniable pattern. She had made the mistake of saying so to the wrong person. "I didn't go to the police," she wrote. "I want you to understand why. It's not because I was a coward, though I was afraid. I want to be careful about collapsing those two things into one. I didn't go because I had seen specifically and clearly what happened to two other people who had expressed doubts about the operation. One of them left the city very suddenly, and the other one, I am going to ask you not to ask about the other one, not right now. And if there's ever a way for me to explain it in person, I will." She had been pregnant when she discovered what the firm was. She had been pregnant for 4 months before she understood the full nature of what she was working inside. She had spent the last 5 months of her pregnancy trying to figure out what to do with a choice that had no good option: stay and raise a child inside a life she'd have to lie about forever, or leave and raise a child in hiding, or do the third thing, she wrote, put you somewhere safe, give you to people who had no connection to any of it, make sure the only thing I left with you was something that could reach me once the danger had passed, if it ever passed, without giving anyone watching a thread to pull. The key was the thread. The safety deposit box had been opened under a false name. She walked Noah through how she'd managed this, carefully, with the specificity of someone who had thought about it a great deal. And the letters inside had been deposited over years, one at a time, by a woman who drove to Pittsburgh from whichever city she was living in at the time, always alone, always in cash. Always on a Tuesday, because Tuesday had been Gerald Frost's golf day, and she had learned to use his habits as cover. She had been doing this for 31 years. Noah looked up from the letter. The April sky was the pale blue of convalescence. A woman walked past with a small dog. A bus stopped at the corner and exhaled. He handed the letter to Delia without explanation. She read it. He watched her face move through something. "Okay," she said quietly when she'd finished. "Yeah, she's been this entire time, yeah." Delia looked at the envelope in her hands, at the handwriting. "She's meticulous," she said, not quite admiring. "Something more complicated than that. This is a person who thought about every single step." "She's an architect," Noah said, and then stopped, surprised by his own words. "She thinks in structures. What holds, what doesn't. You inherited something," Delia said. He hadn't thought about inheritance in those terms before. He had thought of himself as belonging entirely to Margaret and Thomas, shaped by their particular warmth, their Pennsylvania Sunday mornings, their patient and attentive love. It had not occurred to him, concretely, that he might also be shaped by a woman he'd never met, that the way he read buildings, the instinct for understanding what a structure was trying to be, might have come from somewhere. He picked up the sixth letter. The sixth letter was dated 3 years ago. In it, Catherine wrote that something had changed. Gerald Frost had died. A stroke, genuinely. She had confirmed this through careful research, and the organization around him had fractured. and two of the people she had been most afraid of for most of her adult life had died or been imprisoned on unrelated charges in the intervening years. The world she had been hiding from had slowly, partially dissolved. "I don't want to overstate this," she wrote. "I am not suddenly safe in the way I was once unsafe. I am more like a person who has been holding very still for a very long time, who has slowly started to move again, carefully, testing each step. I have been in the same city for 4 years now. That is longer than I have lived anywhere since I was 23. I am telling you this because I want you to know that I am not anymore running." She was living in Portland, Oregon. She had, for the past 2 years, been working at a nonprofit that provided legal aid to people navigating immigration cases. She had studied law remotely across 3 decades of peripatetic living and had passed the bar on her third attempt at 51 years old. "I am telling you all of this," she wrote, "because I want you to know who I am. Not just what happened to me, or what I did, or what I chose, but who I became inside of it. I don't know if that matters to you. I hope it does, a little." She added, near the end of that letter, "I know about the firm. Your firm. I know you became an architect. I don't know if you know you have my hands." Noah looked down at his hands on the bench in the April sun. He thought about a woman he'd never met, in a city he'd never been to, spending 31 years in careful motion, testing each step. He thought about 14 years of twice-yearly dispatches. He is well. He is in school. He appears to be loved. He thought about the cedar box on Margaret's high shelf, placed there not to be hidden, but to be safe until the time was right. He thought, "She didn't leave me. She put me down very carefully, and then she spent 31 years making sure I was still there." He picked up the 7th envelope. He had not opened the 7th letter on the bench. He had held it for a moment, feeling its weight. It was heavier than the others. More pages. And then he had put it back in the box, and he and Delia had driven to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and sat across from each other in a window booth with coffee neither of them was drinking. "Do you want to read it alone?" Delia asked. "No," he said, "but I want to wait a minute." She nodded. Outside the coffee shop window, Pittsburgh continued being Pittsburgh. Somebody's kid on a bicycle, a delivery truck negotiating the corner. The ordinary machinery of a day. "She's in Portland," he said. "I know. I read the letter. She's a lawyer. I know. She passed the bar at 51. I know, Noah." He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle. "I've been thinking for my whole life that the story was about someone leaving. But the story isn't. It's not about leaving. It's about someone staying as close as they could get without." He stopped. She stayed. She just stayed from very far away. Delia was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to contact her?" "I don't know yet. That's honest. I'm trying to be." He picked up the 7th envelope. He opened it carefully, the way he had opened all the others, without tearing the flap. The 7th letter began, "If you've read everything else, then you know most of it. What's left is the part I've had the longest time to think about and the most difficulty writing. I want to tell you about the hour I held you. You were born at 4017 in the morning, in a hospital in Philadelphia, with no one I loved in the room. The doctor was kind and the nurses were efficient, and it was exactly as medical as it sounds, which is to say, both completely ordinary and entirely extraordinary. They put you on my chest, and I looked at you and I had 2 thoughts, essentially simultaneously. The first thought was, you are real. I had known intellectually that you were real for 9 months. I had felt you move, and I had bought the things one buys, and I had thought about you with the particular focused attention of a person who has decided to love something before they've met it. But when I looked at you, real, specific, warm, already a little angry about being here, if I'm reading that expression correctly, and I think I am, what I felt was the specific reality of a person, not a baby in the abstract. You. The second thought was, I can't keep you. I don't mean I couldn't keep you in the sense of being unable to care for you or provide for you. I had resources, I had a plan. I had the fierce determination of a 23-year-old who had survived worse months than most people survive in a lifetime. I mean, keeping you in my life would expose you to the thing I was carrying, and the thing I was carrying was not mine alone anymore, and the only way to make you safe was to make you invisible to it. And the only way to make you invisible to the thing that knew me was to remove you from my proximity entirely. I spent an hour deciding this while holding you. You fell asleep in the crook of my arm 20 minutes in, which I want you to know was not useful to the decision making process. Noah stopped reading. He sat with that for a long moment. The coffee shop around him continued its quiet life. Somewhere behind him, someone laughed at something. The light through the window was that particular mid-morning light, neither urgent nor resting. He thought about a woman who was 23 years old, in a hospital in Philadelphia, in the early hours of the morning, holding her son and deciding. Not because she didn't want him, because she did. He thought about how the worst things are sometimes the things done with the most love and the least alternative. He kept reading. The key was my idea, and I want to explain it because it might seem strange or overly elaborate or like something from a film, and I want it to make sense. I couldn't leave an address. I couldn't leave a name that could be traced. I couldn't leave a letter with you in that bassinet because the letter would be read by nurses, by administrators, by any number of people before it reached the family they were going to find for you, and anything I wrote would become information that existed in the world. But a key is a question. A key is, I built something for you, and when you're ready, you can go find it. A key doesn't say where it's from or who left it. A key is just a promise in metal. I opened the box the same week. I put in a letter. I drove back to Philadelphia and I went back to my life and I began the long, careful business of being someone impossible to find. The subsequent letters I added over years, one at a time, because I needed you to know me not as the woman who made one terrible, impossible choice, but as the person I was becoming while you were becoming a person. I needed you to know that I was not frozen in that moment. I needed you to know. And I say this knowing it may not matter to you, which would be fair, which would be completely fair, that every year I was making choices, difficult ones, and I was also thinking about whether I was the kind of person you would be able to understand if you ever got to the point of trying. I don't know if I am. I don't know what you look like or who you've become or what you need or whether the word mother, applied to me, means anything to you or means something complicated or means nothing at all. All of those would be reasonable. What I know is this: I thought about you every single day. I asked about you twice a year for 15 years. I drove to Pittsburgh to leave you letters. I built a law practice so that if you ever found me, you would find someone worth finding. I am 54 years old. I live at the following address. The address was there, in Portland, written in her careful slanted hand. I am not asking you to come. I am not asking you to anything. I am giving you the information and the decision both, which is what I should have been able to give you all along. The photograph in the box is from 2 years ago. I am leaving it face down because I think you should decide when you're ready to see my face, if you ever are. I think you have my hands. I think about the way you held my finger. I hope the key made sense. I hope when you were growing up and carrying it around, it felt less like a burden and more like a door you hadn't opened yet. I tried to build it that way. I tried to build everything toward you. I love you. I have always loved you. I understand completely if that is insufficient. Catherine Noah sat in the coffee shop for a long time after finishing. Delia, who had been reading her own letter. He had handed it to her, partway through, without a word, had set it down on the table between them. She was looking out the window. She had the particular expression of someone who has learned something that has rearranged their internal furniture and is being respectful of the rearranging. She's not asking for anything, Noah said. No, Delia agreed. She's just giving me information. Yes. He looked at the address, still on the page in front of him. 47 blocks or 47 hours, depending on which direction he chose. I don't know what I'm going to do, he said. I know. That's not. I'm not being evasive. I genuinely don't know. I know that too, Delia said. That's actually the right answer for today. He nodded slowly. He looked at the letter. He looked at the box, which he'd carried out of the bank and set on the table between the coffee cups, that old brass key resting on top of the stack of envelopes. 31 years of a woman building toward him from a very great distance, letter by letter, in the particular slow and careful way of someone who understands that some structures cannot be rushed. He reached into the box. He picked up the photograph. He turned it over. A woman looked back at him. 52 in the photograph, standing outside somewhere green and Pacific. Portland he knew now. She had a gray at her temples and she was not quite smiling, the expression of someone who was asked to be photographed and found it slightly uncomfortable but tried anyway. She had the kind of face that had clearly once been pretty and was now interesting. Which is the better outcome? She looked like someone accustomed to paying attention. She had his hands. He could see it, or maybe he was looking for it, which amounted to the same thing. The way they were folded in front of her, the proportion of the fingers. He had always thought his hands were Thomas's hands, which were good hands, capable and square. But looking at this photograph, he thought, no, these are hers. He set the photograph down carefully, face up. He picked up his coffee, which was cold now, and drank some of it anyway. I'm going to go home, he said, and I'm going to sit with all of this for a while, maybe a few weeks. Good, Delia said. And then I'm going to decide. Also good. I don't know what I'm going to decide. Noah. She looked at him levelly, with the directness he had relied on for 15 years. You've been deciding your whole life. You're very good at it. You just don't always do it quickly, and that's not a flaw. He looked at the key on top of the letters. A brass key, number 44471, left in a bassinet 31 years ago by a 23-year-old woman who had spent an hour with her son and then driven 4 hours to Pittsburgh to open a safety deposit box and begin the long, careful work of explaining herself. He thought, she built me a door. He thought, I've been standing in front of it for a long time. He picked up the key and held it in his palm the way he had at 7, feeling its warmth, which today he didn't find impossible to explain. He had been carrying it for 24 years. Of course it was warm. He closed his hand around it. Outside, Pittsburgh moved through its Tuesday. The bicycle kid, the delivery truck, the ordinary daylight traffic of a life that didn't know it was being witnessed. Noah sat for another moment in the window booth, holding a key that had already done what it was made to do. With a stack of letters beside him written by a woman he hadn't yet met, and he thought about what it meant to build something toward a person you loved from very far away. He thought, every structure is an act of faith that someone will eventually come through the door. He put the key in his pocket. He put the letters back in the box. He picked up the photograph last and looked at it one more time. The woman with his hands standing in her Pacific green, and then he placed it gently on top of everything else. He was not ready yet, but he was, for the first time in 31 years, no longer afraid of being ready. He had a door. He had the key to it. He had a mother who had spent a lifetime building toward the moment he would know which way to turn it. The rest, he thought, could wait a little longer. Not forever. Just long enough to be sure